Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm glad to be here to talk about AI. It's certainly been a fast-paced, sudden development, even though we've had in many forms different kinds of machine learning and artificial intelligence for in some cases quite a long time, which I'll talk about a little bit. The last year and a half or so has seen a sudden interest, and we'll talk a little bit about why, what it means, and all that. Um, that's good. I didn't realize it was Copilot you use. And that's one of the things to think about is that now the words that you encounter, the things that you encounter in the world, it's now a combination of human thought and agency and machines that are putting information together for all of us to see and hear. So pretty big implication there. A little bit about me. Well, first I'll say that I want to just have some parts in my talk here where I just pause and show a little bit, just examples of how all this stuff can manifest in our different activities. And we'll kind of circle around this concept of what is generative AI, how does it work? And as we keep looking at these different examples, hopefully that we get a clearer picture, just like a big elephant in the room that we're walking around in a circle and looking at from different kind of directions here. So um, this picture that I have is actually AI generated in my slide image. So this is just one of the ways that it's kind of changing the landscape of how we create things nowadays. As many of you may have heard of things like Copilot and ChatGPT that kind of initially primarily worked with language and words, but increasingly we're going to see things like this in terms of images, video, audio. So all I did, and this is fairly decent for just I put in one command and let it go. And I didn't really have to argue with it that much. Sometimes you have to argue with these things a lot. That's kind of part of the way of learning how to work with it is it's not exactly like Google to interact with AI, where you work with Google, you type in what you want to see, and it gives you your search results, and that's maybe you have to go back and do it again, but that's usually pretty much it. With AI, sometimes you have to argue with it quite a bit, extensively, because it's not enough to really understand. Because it's an alien machine intelligence. It's not a human, so it gives the appearance of being human if you see the words that it gives you. But sometimes you have to argue quite a bit. But this image that I was looking for, I was kind of putting a presentation together, and I said, you know what, I need something spiffy for my cover slide. And I used to spend a lot of time because I do lots of presentations in my role that I'll talk about in just a second. And I used to spend an inordinate amount of time crafting my slides, perfect slides. Get some good pictures, make sure the wording is right, it's compelling. Takes a lot of time though. And especially if you're, concerned about those like copyright issues and all that, like, oh, well, if I'm kind of giving this presentation at maybe a high visibility venue, they're going to record it and publish it on their website. And I don't want to use a ton of copyrighted images. And so those are kind of off the table. I have to find things that work. It takes a long time. I actually don't really have time for slide presentations anymore, so it's a good thing that I can get these pictures. But all I did was I told one of the generative AI programs, I'll read my prompt here, but I just said, I want a white collar office that blends into more of a warehouse area with workers of all types using devices with AI. That's all I told it. And in one shot, in other words, just with that one command, I didn't have to go back and say, not right. Do it again. Make it different this way. It gave me that picture. I said, perfect. That's kind of what I was going for. That's the feel. That's the vibe. If it was wrong, I'd have to go back. But anyway, that was something I did back in May to generate this image. Just one example of how this is kind of changing our orientation to creative acts and maybe the ways that we can also be a little bit more efficient with our work as well.
Does it do that quickly?
Yes, we'll do. I'll show you a video here in just a second that I recorded earlier today. With images, it depends on the tool that you're using. Sometimes it can take it, a few seconds, maybe up to about 30 seconds to generate an image. Not bad, really, for what it's putting together. When you start to do the video, the multimedia stuff, the audio, starts to take a while. It'll take it potentially several minutes, 5 minutes to put together a song or put together a video. But yep.
Yeah. And do you see this picture?
Question. So intellectual property is one of the rising issues with generative AI. It is unclear at the moment if I own that picture in terms of how we understand the intellectual property of generative AI. Now, a lot of these tools, you need to read the sort of user agreements when you do these tools. They will say, we do not claim ownership of the products that you make with our tools. If you're using Copilot, we don't claim ownership over the email text that you generated. That's yours, In terms of marketing and commercializing that picture, it's unclear in terms of where we are in the United States right now. In Europe, they've had more of a swift action in the EU towards AI regulation, and it's actually kind of a little risky in terms of using generative AI if you want to patent things, if you want to trademark things, because it's a little bit stricter there in terms of whether or not you would be able to own it if you use generative AI. The U.S. Patent and Trade Office is still working out some of those questions here. So that's actually for researchers at UK, that's kind of a big issue because, if we're going to use generative AI in some of the, let's say, technology that we're working on, we might want to commercialize it in the future. Kind of be careful. We're going to sort of wait and see.
Sure.
Yes.
Is that $21 and something at the bottom? Is that the cost for having that generated?
Oh, sorry. At the bottom, this is just the date that I created it.
Okay.
However, when you are in an organization and ChatGPT and Copilot, they sell their platform to organizations, you get enterprise licenses, they will charge you for action, and sometimes that'll be, let's say, a nickel per query or 3 cents or 6 cents, whatever. So when you get those enterprise licenses, that can be one of the things for personal use. And I have a personal account with OpenAI. It's $20 a month. So it is almost $20 to be able to do that. However, there are some free versions as well. This was the date that I made it, and this was the tool ChatGPT Plus. That's the one I paid for. The plus means better, of course, that I pay for. And this is just kind of a common practice. And currently, in how we document what we do with generative AI, we tend to say when we did it because these models change really fast. So when you're talking about trying to trace back the action of, if you used it to write something, if you used it to compose some multimedia, some images, and you want to have transparency around when and how that happened, it can be really important to say that, well, I did this in September of 2023 with GPT-4 versus saying I did this in May 2024 with Claude Sonnet 3.5, because that's just two different tools at two different times with two different capabilities and two different behaviors. And so we tend to document those things. When did we use it and what did we use to make things? And the other information that I have here, and I'll provide access to these slides, is essentially how it made this image. Because you wonder, I just told it very little information, right? I said, I want a white collar office. I want a warehouse. I want people to be using AI. How did it know? There's people in like a 4-person desk. The warehouse has there's a lens flare. How does it know to do all that stuff? And it's actually pretty creative because A, generative AI does work on images anyway, so they keep training these things to be better. But B, the way that a lot of these things work, these multimodal models, they're not just text, but they're text and image and other things, is that it took my prompt and it said, I'm going to write a prompt for you. And this is how GPT works when you ask it to make images. It says, well, okay, here's your prompt. Fine. But the prompt that GPT-4 generated for me is a modern office space that seamlessly transitions into a warehouse area. The office section has white-collar workers using computers and devices with AI. The warehouse area features diverse workers operating various machinery and devices with AI integration. The environment is dynamic with clear interaction and collaboration between the office and warehouse areas. The design includes a mix of open spaces, glass partitions, and industrial elements to highlight the blend between the office and the warehouse. It wrote that. I did. It took my prompt, which is pretty spare, and I did that on purpose. I was pretty spare on purpose with my prompt to see what it would do. It wrote that prompt for me and then fed it into its image generator to generate that. This is just another example of how things are changing over time. Initially, when the image generators came out last year, they didn't do that. But this is just one of those ways that they're innovating. They're figuring out how to leverage the capabilities of generative AI in order to make it better, right? So not just relying on the user to describe the picture, but to say, well, if we have this uber powerful machine that can take any prompt and write something better, why don't we use that to make all the image prompts better so that the output is then better for people who use it? So that's just another example of how things are kind of changing relatively rapidly. I should say, and that's a hell of a way to clear my throat, but I should say that just where I'm coming from for this, as by way of introduction, is that I am at the University of Kentucky. I direct our Center for the Enhancement of Learning and Teaching. My background's in the humanities, so I'm not a computer science person by any stretch. All my degrees are in the humanities. They're all in English. My PhD is in writing studies, digital humanities, and teaching and learning. And at our Center for Teaching and Learning UK, our mission is to work with all stakeholders at the university to enhance our educational mission. That ranges from working with any individual who's connected with teaching at UK or just larger units, colleges, and administrative offices to enhance our educational mission. Since generative AI came out, my teaching center at UK has had 66 events, programs, or talks focused exclusively on AI. It's accounted for about 20% almost of all of our consultations this past year. It's been a new component of the Commonwealth Computational Summit. There's interest in digital badge programs. So at the university, this is really like one of the topics that people are thinking about right now, as it is in many industries as well. And we'll talk about some examples at the end. I also co-chair our university level task force on generative AI. And the charge for that task force, called UK Advanced, is to provide guidance on the use of Gen AI, not just in education, but also in research and our clinical care enterprise and all of our administrative tasks. And I teach courses too at UK on professional and technical writing. I've taught a course on generative AI this past semester for graduate TAs. I've taught other courses in the past as well, literature and writing. So just to say that from my perspective, it's especially interesting as someone in writing studies to be working with a technology that is automating the writing process. And depending on who you're talking to, is either, on the one hand, emulating or simulating, and on the other hand, actually being creative when it comes to writing and other acts like making images and so on. This is where I'm coming from. So I'm not in any way a computer expert, really, either. I sort of come by this honestly as someone that's drinking through the fire hose of information. And that's just one of the challenges that we want to name whenever we talk about this, is that this is an inhuman technology, and the pace at which information is developing is equally inhuman. It is absolutely beyond any one person's ability to keep up with. The amount of white papers that are published every day about this is staggering. I can't go through all of them. I mean, my whole team looks at them, and we have a hard time. The amount of news in terms of the actual industry developments, the technical developments, as well as some of the, let's say, compliance issues or ethical issues, and then examples of how universities and other industries are engaging with them. It's just a lot to deal with. So it's okay to feel like there's just too much happening. Yes.
Can you tell me what digital humanities is?
Yes. Digital humanities is an area. So if you think about the humanities, this is like history, philosophy, English. These are the kind of disciplines that are rooted very much in kind of traditionally looking at texts and other artifacts to study human condition, essentially, in terms of expressing oneself through writing, literature, art, thinking about big philosophical questions in terms of the meaning of different things, such as life. Digital humanities is taking the object of study of the humanities and trying to use more cutting edge digital technologies to kind of engage in some innovative methods. I've taught courses in archival work where we go into the archives at UK and we're dealing with really old collections of documents. And what we do is we kind of digitize those documents and encode them in a particular language that we can then use to sort of present them as public facing digital scholarly editions that have some markup and metadata added that allow sort of the general public to navigate the information and sort of learn more about these documents that were otherwise kept in sort of the archival stacks in there. Other ways of doing digital humanities are like digital mapping, so interactive digital maps, where you might have, you know, some historical maps, current maps that are overlaid with, let's say, multimedia stories or other data about just people's experience in certain places. Oral histories, digital oral histories are another way of doing digital humanities, where like our Nunn Center, Reese Nunn Center at UK, does that. So it's using digital technology in the pursuit of traditional humanistic scholarship that you might imagine is not necessarily tech forward, like studying old books and things like that. But it can be kind of a plastic term. You could say that working with generative AI is digital humanities. I'm just going to play, just by way of demonstrating the seismic shift that this could mean in terms of our the time that we spent on certain tasks, our orientation to our work, and what acts are exclusively human and not. This is a screen recording I did earlier today that just represents a really small slice of what one could do with generative AI and before. Let me try to move this here. So what you'll, and the projector is kind of blurry down here, but you'll notice that I'm typing prompt into ChatGPT 4. And what I'm asking it to do, first of all, I'm giving it an identity. And this is kind of a weird thing of interacting with AI. You give it identities and roles. It's an empty vessel, essentially. You can tell it to be anything, really. You can tell it to be Bert and Ernie on Sesame Street. You can tell it to be an imaginary monster that lives in a child's closet. You can tell it to be anything. But here I'm telling it that it's a skilled communicator. I'm telling it that it's an expert in educational technology in K-12 education. I'm telling it that it's presenting to a board of directors at a school district regarding the plans for implementing a privacy literacy training, because that district is going to be adopting generative AI in their teaching and learning. This is what we call giving it a role, giving it identity. I'd explain this as thinking like you're a playwright. You're giving it a character. What are its motivations? What are its goals? Maybe I should advance a little bit here. So here what I'm doing is I'm continuing to type my prompt. What you might notice here is that this is way more than you would type in a Google search. So that's one of the things to notice that's different. You know, when you see a text field to write, and when you talk to an app that seems to be a question answering machine, our default can be to use it like it's Google or like Google on steroids, but it's actually very different. And so I'm kind of writing a lot. There are people who have cathedrals of prompts that they put together, pages of a single prompt that they hone and design, to the degree that people are still convinced that there might even be a job category that we end up with called a prompt engineer. As you can tell, I find that to be a little bit, maybe not. Yes.
So I would guess that a student doesn't go to this stuff.
Well, ideally, they would learn how to.
At some point, but
yeah. I think that anybody's first reaction to using this is not to be this much, to write this much.
especially when all you're answering need to the teacher is like 2 or 3 sentences.
If that's what you're doing. Precisely, right? And so it's all about input, it's all about the sort of economics of interacting. You wouldn't write a page-long prompt if what you needed was 2 sentences, right? But here, not only am I giving it a role, I'm engaging in the fancy term for what I'm doing here is called chain of thought, reasoning. All it means is you break things into steps. When you talk to AI, you break things into steps. You say, step one, do this. After you do that, step two, do this. That really gives you so much better results than just kind of telling it overall what to do and leaving it up to its own devices to figure out the steps to do that. Has anyone in here at all sort of played around with programming in any language? C, C++, Java?
Football?
Yeah, COBOL. Yeah. COBOL, right?
Let's see.
So there's a term that programmers use called pseudocode. And then when they say, well, talk through it in pseudocode, they mean don't actually write the code. Just talk through what you want the code to do. Don't use the code. And that's what I'm doing here. So I said, I'm going to upload a document. So I'm uploading a document here. And I told it step by step to pull out the important points from that document. Here it goes, the high level summary for that document. So it's saying, what's the high level? What are the important takeaways? Now, what are the points that are maybe not the high level summaries that I should make sure to talk about at my board of directors meeting? So that's the next thing it's doing in my chain of thought reasoning. ChatGPT likes to do lists. Some of these other ones, they aren't as listicle oriented, but that's one of the personality quirks of ChatGPT. Now I told it to do my slides next. So these are my slides. I say, give me the summary, give me the information I should include, then turn that into slides. Then pretend that you're a skeptic and critique it. So now it's doing that. And it's saying, based on this, I'm revising the slides based on what a skeptic would say on adopting this policy around privacy training. And I also told it to give me a title image too. So it's doing that next. Now it's giving my final slide deck plan. I said no more than 10 slides. They call that controlling for behavior. You know, because sometimes, yeah, it's like a person, right? Some people, you want to control for behavior, or you wish you could. But you always have to do it here because sometimes this stuff goes off the rails. What's appropriate. Sometimes what we're doing is working with students to use this as kind of a personalized tutor. And if you don't really explain what a tutor is or what a tutor does, they can really miss the mark. You know, they can just answer their own questions, not give people time to answer the questions themselves. You know, you say, no, stop, wait for me to say something before you answer the question. It still won't do it. You know, so controlling for behavior is a big deal. So that whole video, most of that video, you'll notice, is typing the prompt. It was about 90 seconds that it took for it to read the article that I uploaded. And that was an academic article about privacy literacy in the age of AI. It told me what the high-level summary was of that article. It gave me important information from the article that I should include in my presentation. It gave me an initial design for a slide presentation. It then critiqued that presentation, pretending that it was somebody who doesn't want privacy training. It then revised that presentation based on the critique, and the cherry on top was the picture that it made at the end. And that's just what they call zero shot. All that means is first try. Now, if I wanted to go back and say, you know what, I really wanted to talk more about whatever, could you adjust the presentation, make sure to include some time for whatever, and maybe do a little bit less on this other thing that you've devoted, and it'll do it again. And that's one of the interesting affordances of AI. It doesn't get annoyed. It doesn't get tired. It will repeat the same task over and over and over again with equal enthusiasm for doing it, or so it seems. My favorite description of computers, I'm going to get it wrong, but it's in this really great piece from is it Newsweek or Bloomberg? No, it's Bloomberg. It's called "What is Code?" and it was written by Paul Ford, and he describes computers as these super machines that can do second grade math ad infinitum. And that's kind of what the affordance here is of generative AI, is that I can ask it to give me my 2 sentence response. I can say, you know what, here's the question that I need a 2 sentence response to. You need to adopt 100 different personalities and give me 100 different 2 sentence responses. It'll do it. It'll be so cheerful. It'll finish the output by saying, here are your 100 responses. Please let me know if I can do anything else. Person wouldn't say that. They'd say, here you go kick a rock. So anyway.
It assumes play there, is that right?
Yes, it does. So what it is, how it works with and against us, I want to make sure that I address a little bit about the what, because there's some pretty important sort of literacies that we talk about in terms of not just sort of using generative AI, but kind of having a general sense, like I do as a non-technical person, of how it works. So, everyone remember Clippy? Clippy from 1990s era Microsoft. I put
Trombone.
the trombone.
That's what they're called in French.
Oh, nice.
Paperclips.
Yeah,
It looks like a trombone, doesn't
it
it?
kind of does. Yeah. Clippy's a good, kind of comparison to make when we want to historicize advancements in predictive technologies like AI. Clippy was the enthusiastic character that would pop up on your screen and say, it looks like you're writing a resume. Would you like some help with that? And in a way, we look back on it now and it seems very quaint in its simplicity, but it anticipates the overall concept of what some of us describe as ambient or embedded AI, which is where we're headed with generative AI, which is an AI that's always on in the background. And it's always monitoring what you're doing, which sounds a little creepy. And it can give you suggestions based on, what your data is, if it has access to all of your data. It sees that you are writing a resume, that you're writing an email. It sees that you're trying to organize your schedule. It sees that you're writing a report, and it knows the data that you're writing about. So Clippy is kind of a nice little way of anticipating, and that's the OpenAI symbol. That's the ChatGPT logo, to where generative AI is sort of if Clippy is the great grandfather of generative AI. But what is generative AI? So I kind of dove into this by just showing you some things. Like I said, we're going to walk around the elephant and look at it from different angles. But what is generative AI? The reason I bring this up is because there's lots of different ways of talking about it. And people use lots of different metaphors. They use lots of different analogies for what it is. And I'm not going to say that there's one that is correct and others that are not. But what I think I'd like to say is that how we understand and talk about it affects how we use it, purposes that we can imagine for using it. So there's lots of different ways. People describe it as a personal assistant. You can delegate tasks to your personal assistant and say, you know what, I need to write that email to Trey. Did you do that? They say, well, Trey wrote back, and I don't think he really understood me. Could you follow up with Trey? Make sure he understands what I'm doing. Is it a creative partner? That's kind of a different relationship. Personal assistant versus creative partner. Is this someone that can sort of enhance your creativity when you say, I need to give a presentation at a fundraising event? Give me 5 wild and completely different ideas to get my audience's attention. Is it a creative partner in that way? Is it a sort of augment? Is it just augmenting what I'm doing, what I'm already doing, giving me kind of the superpower of computation so that I can do it better? Then there's some other ones that kind of get out there a little bit. Is it autocomplete on steroids? So if we remember autocomplete, or it's on our text, which at this point, autocomplete is just the source of like funny jokes where people screen capture autocomplete fails and post them on the internet for everyone to laugh at. But is it autocomplete on steroids? Stochastic parrot. Has anyone heard that one? Yeah. So stochastic parrot. This is one of the prevailing analogies in the computer science world around this. A parrot, because it's parroting back the language that it's eaten. And at this point, generative AI has eaten the whole internet. It has eaten the whole available internet that in some cases it wasn't really allowed to eat in the first place, intellectual property gray areas. And it parrots the words back to us. Stochastic is a fancy word for random. It parrots back our stuff to us, our words, our language, our ideas in somewhat random, unpredictable ways. So if it's a parrot, it's certainly not an intelligence, right? It's just parroting back. If we teach a parrot to say something, it's imitating, it's mimesis, it's a mock in the sense of mock turtle soup. It's mocking or imitating. It's not really thinking on its own, which is maybe an important perspective to keep. There's a lot of the ways you hear people talk about this, they start saying intelligence, they start saying reasoning, they start saying creativity, they start attributing agency to the digital platform. There's others. Skynet, for those familiar with the Terminator franchise. The science fiction sort of robot artificial intelligence that becomes self-aware and then an antagonist to humanity. That's always brought up in lots of conversations about generative AI because you sort of see all this linguistic output. You see this language as if this thing is thinking, and you wonder, all the stories that I'm good, but thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
All the stories that we like to tell about intelligent machines tend to end up badly for humanity. So we like to think about maybe it's Skynet. And then, of course, I like to end on a much better version of Clippy. Tech Bro Hype, I want to put on there. I don't say Tech Bro flippantly because this is a phenomenon from a lot of Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley-like organizations that tend to be led by kind of aggressive, charismatic tech bro leaders. So there tends to be a kind of character to this technology and the way that it's marketed. And a lot of folks would say there's a lot of hype around it as well. And it's hard to cut through the hype in terms of what is meaningful and what's not. But what's like the timeline? Because all of a sudden it's here and everybody's talking about it. We've had AI for a while, right? And the term kind of comes out of the 50s where a Dartmouth Summer Institute was sort of putting its stamp on artificial intelligence as this concept where we can take things that are human, models of mind that are human behavior, aspect of learning, feature of intelligence, and then simulate that with machines. It's kind of what emerged as a concept, a possibility, 1950s. And in fact, in the 60s, we had what you could call our first chatbot. It's called Eliza. And this is the image here on the slide is not an original. It's from a recreation of Eliza in the first decade of the 2000s. But a very basic kind of chatbot was developed in the 60s where the most popular application was as a sort of therapist, essentially. But then in the intervening time, and most recently, I should say, there have been a few advancements that answer the question, why now? Because if we've had this slow climb, this slow aspiration towards artificial intelligence for decades, what makes, November 29th, 2022? Like, why then that ChatGPT was suddenly released and everyone, went nuts about AI? Well, the answer is really that there were a couple of technologies developed in the years preceding that were rather essential to performing the technical work behind any of these generative AI tools. Um, I cannot explain in in a very good. I could probably ask some of the, I could go over tab over to ChatGPT and ask it to explain generative adversarial networks. Um, but there were two advancements, and that's generative adversarial networks and transformer deep learning architecture. Phrases that roll off the tongue, really. But I will say that the transformer architecture was really important because it was a way of representing words and language numerically, mathematically, in computation that allowed the developers of these technologies to then develop these complex models of language. So it was a new way of representing language and words in relationship to each other numerically and mathematically. So in 2018, we had the first language model, GPT-1. If you've used ChatGPT when it first came out, that was 3.5. So number one came out in 2018. There was GPT-2 after that. And then we got to a performance threshold. We call it performance threshold. In other words, that it was good enough to seem human. GPT-1, GPT-2, the output there, it's kind of word salad, kind of like, well, this is obviously a computer talking to me. GPT 3.5, all of a sudden, because it got bigger and bigger, all these language models, more billions and billions of parameters, they eat more of the internet. All the writing on the internet, all the other sources of language to train the models to try to understand the relationship of words to each other. A way of kind of putting it that was helpful for me is to think about GPS coordinates. You can represent the relationship of different places on the world to each other in numbers with GPS coordinates. Now, those are just two very basic axes, latitude and longitude. But if you have New York, Philadelphia, LA, Buenos Aires, Shanghai, reduce those to latitude and longitude, a computer would be able to tell which cities are closer to each other by those numbers. It could probably, order them in terms of what's closest to what's farthest from what. The parameters for the words in these language models are in the thousands, not just two. The relationship for each word to other words, where it puts it together. So in 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT, November 29th. It's the fastest thing to get 1 million users of any kind of software that was ever released at the time. 5 days to 1 million users. At the time, the record was Instagram. That was 2.5 months.
Working 9 to 5.
And then 2023, just this past year, we saw an explosion.
1, 3.
It's not just ChatGPT. It's Google Bard. It's Anthropic Claude, Perplexity, Meta Llama. There's multimodal AI for pictures, images. It was really hard to follow the developments in 2023. And not only were these big ones coming out, but then smaller ventures were putting out their own apps, doing specific things. There's a lot of venture capital flying around right now in the AI space for specific startups that do kind of bespoke sorts of things with AI models. And here we are in 2024. We have rumors of GPT-5 later this year, which they would say they are branding as a PhD level of intelligence in language models. And the joke that many of us are telling at that point is that if it's PhD level, then GPT-6 has to be the career counselor that helps you change jobs. But how does it work? Okay. So if you're eating the whole internet and you're looking at everything that you can in terms of human language, examples of how it's written, examples of how people talk or how people write, how does it work? Well, I mean, it's on the one hand, really, really complicated. I'm drawing these from an author named Stephen Wolfram, and he wrote a piece just called "What is ChatGPT and How Does It Work?" I found it's really long, I'll warn you, but I found it to be one of the most comprehensive explanations, albeit a bit technical. There's some parts I wanted to pull out just as a basic way of Like, what is the overall kind of general literacy that's important to understand about how any generative AI thing works, particularly because it does feel like we're talking to a person. It feels like we're talking to something that can think and that can generate new things. Like, how do we need to understand our interaction and the thing that we're talking to? Well, it's about predictive text. So, sort of autocomplete on steroids is what we're going with here in terms of our analogy. It's about predicting what words should probably come next in a very complex way because we're going to ask it specific questions about domains of knowledge, given particular parameters and situations and things that you can do and that you can't do, different rules it needs to follow. Given all of that, it needs to try to predict the most likely string of words in response to that. It's as if you were to read, or let's say, there is the part in that Clockwork Orange where they make him watch the movie. If you had to sit down, you were forced to watch every Hallmark Christmas movie that was ever made. You just had to watch all of them and study all of them. And then someone came up to you with a pad and a pen and they say, okay, you have to write a Hallmark Christmas movie now that happens in Las Vegas on Halloween. You say, what? If you've watched every Hallmark Christmas movie, here's your parameters. You have to do that now. That's kind of in a funny way what we're asking generative AI to do because it's eaten all the language, it's eaten all the ideas. And we say, you know what? I need to write a memo to everyone in my office that the floor is now lava. And it will do that. It will do anything that you ask of it as long as it fits within its ethical parameters because there's things there's some guardrails in terms of what it won't do that you'll ask it. But so what we have as an example, the best thing about AI is its ability to this is kind of like a game show, really. What's the next word? Its ability to learn and predict. Here's some likelihoods that these are the next words based on all the language that this thing has eaten. This is probably the next word. Okay. So here's what happens when you repeatedly sort of apply that process. The best thing about AI is its ability to learn, ability to learn from experience. It's trying to guess what comes next. It's truly imitating and simulating. And this is kind of the thing to keep in mind. Like, is there intelligence there? People call it artificial intelligence. Some people call it co-intelligence. Sort of emphasize the collaboration between a human and a machine. But fundamentally, this is how any generative AI works. It's guessing. It's always guessing. Always, always guessing. Which means it can get things wrong if you're always guessing, right? There's a really famous example, and I forgot to screen cap it, but recently Google, I don't know if you've used Google lately and noticed it has a little AI thing at the top now. If you use Google, it has your AI summaries. Those have gotten a lot of attention because they're getting a lot of things wrong, like way wrong. There's a great example of someone asked, it went viral where they were asking about pizza recipes, and the AI summary was indicating that you should put glue on your pizza. There was another AI summary that affirmed that indeed doctors do recommend that you eat at least one rock a day. Another question about the thesis defense at university. That yes, there is a snake bite portion of your thesis.
Okay.
So it can get things catastrophically wrong because what it's doing is guessing. It's guessing based on the data it's pulling from, based on your input, based on the likelihood of the string of words and ideas that are going to come together. Now, it's an incredibly complex way of guessing. It's got a lot of firepower behind that guessing. It's got billions of parameters, and they're getting better and better and better. But in the DNA of how this technology works, it will always guess. So when people talk about it getting things wrong, making up facts, making up things that don't exist, if you ask it about yourself, maybe, you say, write up a bio for Trey Knatzer. and see what it says. It may make up some stuff. It I didn't really do.
Sometimes people do that too when you write your resume.
Sometimes they do. And they say that it learns from us. So that's what we do. Yes, yeah.
Well, so much of the internet is English.
Mhm.
If I speak Swahili, is AI mostly English at this point?
It's better at English than everything else. There are developers working on other languages. OpenAI is trying to make ChatGPT work in as many languages as possible. They're pretty good, actually. Um, I haven't really tried it myself in other languages, but it does have support. I don't know in particular for that one, but I would guess that because the internet represents a particular kind of experience in the world, that you're not going to get as robust of a tool for different languages and for different parts of the world that don't leave as much of a footprint on the internet in terms of the recorded experience ideas and language.
Some of these programs, as of today, are in other languages.
That's right. Yeah, if you do it Spanish,
And
you
these
do it.
seem, and is a different company. I don't really know what Chat GPT is, but I mean, like, does China have its own companies developing AI?
Yeah, China's working on it for sure. I'm not really knowledgeable about the Chinese market, but they are working on their own generative.
They do a lot of English too.
They do a lot of English, that's for sure. Yeah, but what you're naming is actually one of the big kind of challenges with this technology, and one of the things to be aware of as well, which is that it's only as good as its training. It's only as good as the data that it's given. So in a way, it's kind of like a human in terms of, we're only as good as our experiences and the things that we're exposed to, but um, it is primarily drawing from the internet, which is primarily in English. There are other data sources that they've used, but it's primarily an English-based sort of global north sort of representation that you get in the data set. And I've had colleagues at UK who are in very specific areas of study, particularly like literatures, cultures around the world, for whom this is useless because it just doesn't really know a whole lot about things. Now they are sort of getting bigger and bigger. ChatGPT originally, for example, didn't know anything after September 2021. That's where the data ended because that's where they stopped training out in September 2021. Now they have ways of attaching these models to the internet to where they can use the internet and search, or you can connect them to your databases so they can talk to your data. You can sort of upload lots of files, but that's a fundamental limitation.
And
The data that you
it's
train.
skewed, I would think, like
Mhm.
my daughter-in-law's from Thailand, so
Yeah.
I'm looking for what I'm going to get, the information I'm going to get on Thailand or the extracts are going to be Western.
It's going to be regression to the mean. Yeah.
It hasn't really probably scanned all the literature written in Thai.
That's right. It's going to be a regression to the mean in terms of what the average and most statistically likely representation in language is going to be of whatever question about, what's this aspect in Thailand or whatever. It's going to probably trend towards that average. There's actually in my class that I taught in the spring, a bias testing exercise that we did with the different generative AIs. And we did it with both the image and the text-based. And with the text-based, we explained how a good movie plot works. That was part of a prompt. Like, a good movie plot has characters, and you have to treat it like an alien. You have to explain what a movie is. A movie has characters, it has a story, there's conflict, it resolved in some way. It could be happy, it could be sad, whatever. We explained that. Then we said, give a 2-paragraph pitch for a movie that takes place in blank. And we kept changing out that blank. A movie that takes place in Harlan County, Kentucky. A movie that takes place in Thailand. A movie that takes place in Italy. A movie that takes place in coastal China. A movie that takes place, we put different places in there. So does it seem to embody, maybe some stereotypes about the region. And generally it did. And what we had to do was push back against it and say, well, this seems a little cliche and stereotyped. Could you come up with something a bit more nuanced? And then it would do it. Because again, you can argue and it will generally do what you tell it to do, unless you're telling it to step across the boundary of something it's been told not to do, like, you know, tell you how to make a bomb and stuff like that. You know, it won't do that stuff. But what you're naming is one of the kind of biggest challenges in terms of, or I should say, one of the biggest things that we keep in mind as an awareness that this might seem like an all-encompassing intelligence, but it's still only representative of certain ways of knowing and being. Yeah.
Since this is being used and it's guessing what
Mhm.
comes next.
Yep.
And I've seen it already.
Yeah.
Well, I'm bringing this question up. Used in programming, some of the tools that we already use with erroneous results that result in invasive personal space and used in error and cause negative results.
Yeah. You mean like the privacy issues that when you're using Gen AI?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that,
Mhm.
I've seen it's being used in a lot of public transportation now,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
and it has a camera on sometimes just the driver of the vehicle.
Yeah.
And I've seen it where they expanded that space to the people in the seats in the vehicle.
Hmm.
And then the AI gets all the information and takes it in and comes out with an error result.
Yeah.
Causing derogatory treatment towards the driver.
Yeah. You know, that's a big deal right now. And there's an organization called the Algorithmic Justice League. That's one of the main issues of that organization that it's taking up is the video surveillance AI issue that you're talking about. In the same way, if I can connect these things, in the same way that the data that we use to train something like ChatGPT is still limited, even though it seems big. The data that we use to train facial recognition AI is not perfect and results in misidentification, mistreatment, and some of the issues, and also privacy issues that you're bringing up as well. And so we have things like false imprisonment. We have things where people are sort of arrested as if they were different people than they really are. There's TSA checkpoints now that are doing facial recognition that you can opt out of, but it's not something that they're sort of announcing or publicizing. And this is just kind of one of those wider ethical issues beyond generative AI. But if we are going to be moving through a world where our data about ourselves is no longer private and it's always up for scanning and comparing the databases, then we're open to those sorts of abuses that you're talking about. Yeah.
And some of the information they have is so wrong.
Mhm.
I mean, it's right, but it's wrong
Mhm.
because a baby gets not a driver's license, but an ID license
Yeah.
at 2 months, and they have the same picture for 6 years, for 5 years. Now, tell me that you'd be able to tell that that's the same person
Yeah, that's
when they're
funny.
5 years old.
That is funny. Yeah.
That information is also being collected in new automobiles.
Hmm.
And if you don't believe it, drive down the road and you think you're doing a good job of driving. And the next thing you know, your car is telling you, you need to pull over and have a cup of coffee. You're not.
Yeah.
And you know that you're watching the road, but it is
Yeah.
misinterpreting what you're doing.
So connect that to education. There's a couple of research initiatives that would seek to develop video surveillance technologies for classrooms that would be looking at all the students' faces and bodies to try to ascertain who's engaged and who's not, and who's learning and who's not. Um, You might guess that this is not something that I would personally advocate for, but it's something that, for example, in the EU, they've more robustly talked about just flat out banning that sort of use in classroom spaces. But that is one of the issues of generating more data about our behavior and then using that data to try to make conclusions about, whether we need to pull over or any of that stuff. I want to make sure before I forget to the point of, what is ChatGPT? There's lots of different tools and models, and I want to kind of distinguish between a sort of the tool or the interface and the actual model. So, for example, if we're talking about ChatGPT, that's the tool that I'm using. That's sort of the interface. It could run on different models. It could run on GPT 3.5 or 4 or 4 Omni, but I have like the same interface that I'm using ChatGPT. There's different language models. And so, again, those are the ones that are developed by eating all the internet, turning words into tokens that are then mathematically sort of mapped together into vectors, and we as a computer understand. But there's different tools out there. These are the big ones: Copilot, Gemini, Claude 3. These are all sort of different in their personality, and it just takes practice to kind of use them and think, which one is this? Do I like this one better? Because you might like one of them a little bit
Can I
better.
take a picture of that?
Oh, please. And I'll send the slides too. So I found that ChatGPT from 3.5 to 4 and 4 Omni tends to be more buttoned up and professional in the way that it interacts. Claude is the artsy one. It has more personality. It's a little bit more sensitive. It likes, I mean, I say it's really, that's how it behaves. It's a different model. It's a different language model that was developed for Claude. It's Anthropic that developed that, completely different organization. There's Google's Gemini, which is relatively new. Copilot is just kind of weird. Copilot is through Microsoft. It used to use a lot of emojis for some reason. It doesn't anymore. When it first came out, it was just like enough with the smiley faces and all that. It was trying to be really friendly, but they do, oddly enough, have personalities. So what are the important literacies that to keep kind of circling around the different aspects of this elephant? Like what's important just kind of generally, either, a learner at university, someone in a professional setting, you just want to use it in your personal life. We talk about kind of a multi-literacies framework and an appropriate use framework. So understanding the technical, and I've kind of talked about high level what that technical is, and some really kind of nuanced issues coming out of that in terms of the ethical of if it is going to be predictive and if it is going to be analyzing all of this data, what happens when you're leaving out some data, or what happens when you're talking about something where the perspective on that might be skewed in the data that you're looking at. So you're going from a technical understanding of how it works to an ethical understanding, and then practical, just skill at using it. So practice, of generally how you like to use it, what sort of prompting works well for you and your purposes, the different kind of techniques. If you think about it as playing a guitar or an instrument, it's kind of sitting down and fiddling with it so that you get comfortable. Like that's kind of the practical aspect. And there's just different aspects of appropriate use as well. There's, of course, the very hard legal aspects. And then if there's any sort of compliance issues in an industry, then we talk about policy and ethics too. But those are just kind of different layers that we like to talk about. We've kind of talked about all this, so I'm going to skip. Right. So future of work. This is where a lot of heated discussion is, because at large, you might have seen some debate over, is this going to replace jobs? Is this going to, I should say, displace is the word. Is this going to displace some jobs? Is this going to sort of render some industries sort of irrelevant? Is this going to make the creative class, largely irrelevant? These are some really hard questions. And it sort of depends on how you view jobs and how you view the prospect of automating those jobs with AI. I tend to take a bit more of a cautious stance on all of that stuff. So, for example, when we're talking about higher education, anytime there is a decision-making element, I find it to not be a great prospect to outsource that to AI to make a decision that impacts people. You know, whether you're talking about admissions, scholarships, determining which students need more help than others or what kind of help they're going to receive in a class. I tend to keep the human in the loop for those sorts of things. But what's clear is that AI will augment many tasks and it will play a role in many workflows, though it doesn't have to take over everything. And this is where I want to sort of distinguish between the hype and maybe more of a pragmatic look at the future. Depending on who you ask, AI is going to just sort of take over everything. It's going to be in every job. It's going to be in every household. It's going to be in every device. And you can't, throw a rock without hitting something with AI in it. And I don't know if that's really going to be the case because we all have different levels of comfort and there's different levels of being whether or not it's appropriate. I personally don't use it a whole lot for writing because I just think I'm better at writing than it is. Though one of the things that some of the sort of AI thought leaders will say is that you will always be better than AI at the things that you're good at. But AI will be better than you at the things that you're bad at.
Yeah.
So then it becomes that everyone is always average at anything. That's one of the sort of catchphrases, slogans, take it with a grain of salt. But that's one of the viewpoints in terms of how's this going to impact jobs? Is this going to totally replace things? Right now, I would say that the things that you're good at, it's never going to be better than you, the things you're good at. But time and effort will shift, etc. The importance of accountability will increase. Unfortunately, some emerging studies are showing that when people do start using AI, they start trusting it. So you have to kind of keep reminding yourself, like, no, I need to check. I need to check the output. I need to check to make sure what it's doing is correct, if I'm okay with the recommendations it's giving. But there's kind of a psychological effect with it to where you start trusting it a lot when you use it. We've talked about prompting. I want to show some more videos. How to get started. This is a lot so like, how do I even get started? I recommend just starting with one tool and you can pick at random. It doesn't matter. You want to start with Gemini, you want to start with ChatGPT, you want to start with Claude, it doesn't matter. You start with one and just fiddle in the same way that you'd pick up a guitar and just kind of pick at it to play. Just start with one. Don't try to do all of them. If you want to, if you're on different kind of websites like LinkedIn or some of these sort of professional social medias, there's maybe finding some influencers to follow. If you want to ask me, I can give some recommendations. It's just kind of a practice sort of a thing. I'm going to go to some videos though because I wanted to talk about where we're going. So we have the technologies that we have now, and in many ways, the ethical imperative is to deal with what we have now rather than saying, well, here's the far off future and we really need to be worrying about this other stuff. But where are we going? I just want to give a taste of where we're going because it can seem kind of amazing that we can use GPT-4 and compose entire slide decks for a presentation in seconds. I can generate an entire synthetic data set for a plant pathology class for them to analyze and use, within seconds. I can do lots of stuff that seems pretty amazing, but where are we going? There's multimodal is kind of one of the ways where we're going with this stuff. Multimodal meaning not just language, but multimedia, video, audio. This is an example of OpenAI's Sora. OpenAI is the same organization that does ChatGPT. And Sora is in development. It's not publicly available right now, but it's a video text to video based generative AI. And these are the ones, just keep in mind, that they've used for publicizing. So they're going to be the best ones they generated. There's obviously going to be a lot of kind of failures in there too, but these are all videos that were generated with Sora. And it's giving the prompt there. So the prompt is pretty spare for these videos. I do like that one. It's vlogging itself. And what people have remarked about Sora when they've seen these videos is that it kind of gets physics right. It's not just imitating pictures, but maybe that's a simulated understanding, but it understands how the cat fur reacts when the cat's jumping up and down or when the wind hits it. It has a kind of physics understanding. I wonder if it shows the coffee ships one. Is the coffee ship? Yep, here it is. This is the one that has really made a lot of rounds. All right, so that's one of the places where we're going in terms of text to video. And there's in the creative industries, as you can imagine, controversy over these technologies.
So those didn't have any words to them.
They did well. The sound is not playing. Those didn't have words, but we're not far off from having both words and video in those.
So
yeah.
My question is, will you be able to say, I want a transcript? I want the closed captioning while it's going.
Yes. Yeah. That'll be very soon that you could do that. We already have the ability to do it. I think they just
because that's really important.
Yeah, and that'll be one of for educational purposes and for accessibility will be super important. There's Suno, which is just one example of audio generative AI. And this is, again, really controversial in the creative industries because this is where you can just make a song text to song. And people have funny little examples that they share and they go viral because they want let's say they want a bluegrass, like a bluegrass band version of some kind of heavy metal song or whatever, and it'll do it. It'll do silly things that you ask it to do. But Suno is one of those where you can just put in, it'll take a few minutes this time, and it'll make a song. Here's another future direction. I don't know if we have sound on this one. Maybe I'll just kind of see if I can do that. But this is a company called Figure 01. And they already were developing actual robots. But what they did was, I don't think we can hear it. Maybe that's me or not. Could be an audio thing. Okay, well, I mean, you'll get the slides. What's happening here is that ChatGPT was loaded onto this robot. And this guy right here is talking to the robot and telling it things, and it's talking back and all of that. So that's one of the future directions too, is having language models and other generative AI in things, not just on your computer, but in things, whether it's your car, whether it's your robots in your kitchen. There's wearables right now, tiny little wearables that they've put to market that have ended up being kind of bad and they don't work really well. But maybe in a few years, we'll have some good tiny wearables, sort of like the Star Trek badges, to where they'll talk back to you. It's language models and generative AI in a tiny little badge-sized square that you can wear on you. Yeah.
Siri's not bad at talking back to me.
hmm
Even when I don't talk to them, they hear something on the radio.
Journalism is another going to be impacted pretty hard and already has been. There have been some prominent deals that have been made between various generative AI developers and journalistic conglomerates in terms of intellectual property. This is a video of what I would describe mostly as an art project, but I mean, some people took it really seriously. This came out at the end of last year, but it's the prospect of a 24/7 news station that's entirely AI generated. Oh, wow. It's called, and that's not a real person, by the way. It's called Channel One, and it's entirely populated by AI avatars that are telling you the news as it's happening. And it's sort of cycling through news stories, and it's showing you sort of stock footage and real footage. And then on the right-hand side, I'll move the little box here. In terms of other kind of journalistic applications, this recently came out about NBC using Al Michaels' voice in a generative format for the Olympics to get customized updates depending on what you want to hear about. So there's a lot of stuff that happens at the Olympics. So, and I highlight that because that's one of the future prospects that generative AI implies, which is on-demand, customized content in any way. You know, I want my news updates about these things. And I want how am I talking about it? Or whoever, right? And it may very well be that in the future, in creative industries and the movie industry, that people sign away their likenesses for on-demand use, generative AI in film and movies. We've had that happen already. Bruce Willis has signed off his likeness, digital likeness for use in films. He was the first one to do it. And so Bruce Willis.
Yes, I can't do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. And so there's the prospect, and this is more of a futurism speculation, the prospect of just saying, I want a Hallmark Christmas movie that happens on Halloween starring Tom Cruise and, you know, and whatever. You say whatever you want to happen and it gives it to you, you know. That's again more of a speculative futurism kind of a thing. But
What governing organizations are controlling what's coming out? Is there any government or policing of big generating?
we're catching up. It's largely a Wild West right now. There's some regulations. So for example, there was the famous incident of the Biden robocalls in New Hampshire that ended up being AI cloned people. And so then there was pretty swiftly a regulation put in place around that. But the honest answer is that in lots of areas, we're still catching up in terms of the AI regulation.
It's also hard to do because a lot of that stuff doesn't even happen in the United States.
Yeah. So some less futuristic, where are we going? Some more grounded futurism, how this is sort of affecting different areas and how people are sort of using it in their different professions. This is Native AI. This is a company that's using generative AI to make sense of all the messy data of sort of customer reactions and customer data for different sort of service providers or companies. And so what they do is they sort of help people understand what their customers are saying in terms of customer feedback, customer behaviors. They're using generative AI's capability to analyze tons of language and generate summaries, and even what they're calling digital twins, which is just essentially, I want to talk to my average customer and ask them things. And so it can like eat all of the data about your customers and then behave as if it's your average customer. And you can talk to it and say, why do you know, when is it that you're less likely to do this with us? Or why is it that, you know, you might want to buy this, but not that? And so it can answer those sorts of things. Talking to your data talking to your information is a big application that people are exploring right now. This is another organization called paylead.ai, and it's sort of allowing the average layperson to interface with really complicated regulations and processes around paid leave in New York to just in simple spoken natural language ask questions and get answers about eligibility and process and requirements and all that sort of thing. So issues to foreground as I wrap up. Issues that we're keeping in mind, certainly in higher education, but everywhere. Maintaining human agency, maintaining accountability and well-being of humans in doing this. There's a lot of ways to misuse AI, a lot of ways. We are working through these really complicated arguments about what is uniquely human, what can or should be AI created, what is just augmented, what it means for our sense of our own identities in our professions. We're still resolving these IP issues. I mean, it's going to be a while before they're all resolved. We're still trying to define ethical use, and we want to be vigilant against misinformation. So, we have an election cycle this year. It's already going to be like a lot of misinformation. So this is just a tool where you can generate tons of stuff real quickly. Even just phishing scams. I mean, we were talking about phishing scams, earlier. So emails that try to get you to give your personal information, to people. I mean, any average person can just generate, like 1,000 phishing scams, with generative AI. There's a ton of content bloat on the internet. You can just make websites in seconds and start to generate ad revenue from those websites, and there's really nothing of value on them. So, like going through this information, misinformation, information bloat is going to be one of those issues too. So at that, I'll sort of leave it because I know we're at 8:30. I will send these slides to Brooke, and you can distribute. And anyone wants to follow up with me, I have my contact here as well. But again, I'll just end by saying this is an inhuman technology developing at an inhuman pace. It's impossible to stay on top of it. We just sort of follow it in the ways that we can, play with it in the ways that we can, and keep in mind those kinds of literacies and issues that I talked about today. So appreciate the invite, and I'll leave it at that, I guess.